BSL version of the Oberman next Thursday here on BBC2 at the same time. It's time to celebrate now as BBC2 explores more Jewish beliefs.
Today, we're going to find out about the Jewish festival of Passover. Our friend Tracy is going to help us. Watch!
Oh, hello. I'm going to a bit of a special party, and I didn't know what to wear, so I bought the lot. Heavy. Right, anyone know where we can get a taxi? Come on. I'm Tracy, by the way, and I'm Jewish. And tomorrow is the start of Passover, a really special time in the Jewish year. Normally, I spend Passover, or Pesach, as we call it, with my family in London. But I'm away from home this year. I'm in Glasgow. But the really good thing about being Jewish is that you're never alone. There's always a Jewish family who's willing to invite you in so you can celebrate Passover with them. And that's where I'm going now. So while I'm travelling, why don't you watch a story? It'll explain how Passover got its name. See you in a bit.
"3,000 years ago, the Jewish people were living as slaves in Egypt. The Egyptian king, the Pharaoh, needed them to build his pyramids. Year after year, they worked in the hot sun. They were very unhappy, and life was hard. But they couldn't escape. One day, a young shepherd, Moses, was told by God to ask the Pharaoh to release the Jewish people. The Pharaoh had told the Jews that they mustn't worship God anymore, so Moses was very scared. But he went to the Pharaoh as God had told him. "Let my people go," he asked the Pharaoh. But the Pharaoh refused. God was very angry and said he would punish all the Egyptian people if the Jews weren't allowed to go free. Moses warned the Pharaoh, but still the Pharaoh refused. So God sent 10 terrible plagues. First of all, the rivers turned into blood. Then frogs rained down from the sky. Lice appeared, making everyone scratch and itch. Swarms of flies arrived, and the cattle all became ill and died. The people got boils all over their bodies. Giant hailstones fell. Clouds of locusts filled the fields and ate all the crops. Darkness came in the daytime. Still, the Pharaoh refused to let the Jews go. So God sent one last punishment: an angel to kill the Egyptians' firstborn children. He warned Moses that the Jews should put a special mark on their doors, so the angel would pass over their houses and leave them safe. This is why we now remember this time as Passover. At last, to the great relief of the Egyptian people, the Pharaoh gave in and told Moses the Jews could go. The Jews picked up their belongings and followed Moses out into the desert. They were free.
Or so they thought, because Pharaoh changed his mind and sent his huge army to fetch Moses and his people back again. The Jewish people were chased across the desert by the army towards a huge sea called the Reed Sea, or we call it today the Red Sea. They were trapped. The sea was in front of them, the army was behind them. What were they going to do? They needed a miracle from God to save them. And that's exactly what happened. God made the waters of the Red Sea part. The waters just lifted. And when the Jewish people had crossed to the other side, God made the waters close back in again. So the Pharaoh's army were drowned. Now the Jewish people were truly free. Free from slavery, free to practice their religion, and free to find the new home that God had promised them. And this is my new home for the next couple of days.
Hi, Tracy.
Thanks, Warren.
Hello. Hi, Susan.
Aw.
Hi, Tracy.
Hi, Adam. How are you? Hi, Nathan.
Yes, no.
Thanks, Warren.
Right.
Will you help me with my case?
Yes.
It's really heavy. My friend Adam. So, we're all looking forward to Passover?
Yes.
We've got loads of things to do, haven't we? The story of how Moses led the Jewish people out of Egypt is so important that even now, 3,000 years later, we still celebrate it every year. The celebration is, of course, called Passover, and it lasts 8 days. Shall we go and find out how Adam and Nathan celebrate Passover? Because, you know, every family does it slightly differently. Hello. The high point of the whole celebration is a big meal that takes place on the first and second night of Passover. It's called the Seder, and children love it. In fact, they have a starring role and get to stay up really, really late. Don't they, Nathan? Oh, hello.
Hello.
Have you been getting everything ready for Passover?
Yes, I've been practicing the 4 questions with my dad.
Hello.
Lila say hi, Lila say me go.
That's very good, Adam. Very good. How about if we try the second one now? Share.
Hebrew is the special language that Jewish people pray in and do their services in. When I was a little girl, I had to learn the 4 questions as well. Let's see if I can remember them. Why on this night do we eat matzah? Why on this night do we eat bitter herbs? Why on this night do we dip the food twice? And why on this night do we lean to the left?
Very good.
These 4 questions get everybody at the Seder table talking about the story of Passover and what it means. Now, Susan, anything else we need to do?
Oh, we've still got to search for the bits of food made from flour. It's time to search for the chametz.
The Jews had no time to let their bread rise before they left Egypt. To remember that bit of the story, we have a rule that tells us there mustn't be any food left in the house made out of flour that has risen. Not even a crumb. So even when you think the house is really clean, you have to have one last check, with a feather for sweeping and a candle for seeing into the corners.
Time for bed. In the morning we'll make the Seder.
The Seder is a really special meal that tells a story in a way that you can never forget. A meal that tells a story. That's pretty cool, isn't it? And it works. Jewish people have been eating the exact same meal for thousands of years, keeping alive the story and the meaning of the great exodus from Egypt. Everything has a story meaning. Do you understand? Take this, for example. During the Seder, everyone drinks wine or grape juice. One of the things it reminds us of is the blood of the injured Jewish slaves. Do you get it? Now, what else have we got? Adam? Thank you. Right, parsley and salt water. During the meal, you have to dip the parsley into it because it reminds us of the tears shed by the slaves. Because, well, tears are salty, aren't they? It also reminds us of the salty sea that washed back over the Egyptian army as they chased Moses and his people. Salty. What else have we got there?
Best stuff.
Thank you. Do you know what this is called?
No.
This is called horseradish. Do you want to try a bit?
Yes.
The Seder plate always has some kind of bitter herb like horseradish on it, as a reminder of the hard and bitter life that the slaves had in Egypt. A roasted bone and an egg. These are to remind us of the offerings made in the temple to God. Now, what's missing? Haroset. You chop up walnuts, cinnamon and apple. Is it nearly done?
Yeah.
Thank you. This haroset may look a bit funny, but it tastes lovely. It's a bit of a sticky mess, but can you guess what it's meant to remind us of? It reminds us of the mortar, or cement, used by the Jewish slaves to stick the stones together for the pyramids all those years ago in Egypt. Now, one more thing. A final bitter herb. That is everything for the Seder plate. Everything we need to tell our story. Shall we take it through? Wow, isn't this exciting? But I think there's something missing.
Matzah!
Matzah! That's what it is. The Egyptians were so frightened by the 10 plagues that they urged the Jews to leave very quickly. The Jews had no time to bake proper bread for their journey. They only had time to make matzah, a very flat and crispy bread. See? So, at Passover, we eat matzah to remind us of just how quickly the Jews had to leave Egypt. There's also a fun thing we do with matzah, but I'll tell you about that later.
You know, I think we should be getting ready.
What do you think?
It is my duty as the woman of the house to say the blessing over the candles. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu.
This is lovely.
And then help Michael as he symbolically washes his hands.
During the meal, we all take turns to read from a special book called the Haggadah. It tells the story about how Moses took the Jews out of Egypt to the Promised Land, the Exodus. Also during the meal, we have to drink 4 glasses of wine or 4 glasses of grape juice. This is to remind us of how God has helped us. He took us out of Egypt. He freed us from slavery. He chose us as his very own people, and he promised us a land of our own. The Seder can take hours while we all tell the story and talk about it. Anyway, while we eat, you watch the best bits and see if you can remember what they all mean. You never know, you may be able to answer Adam's 4 questions.
Why on this night do we only eat matzah?
We had no time to bake proper bread.
Why do we eat bitter herbs?
To remind us of our sad past.
Why do we dip our food twice?
Okay, we'll have to pass it.
To remind us of the tears that were shed.
Why on this night do we lean to the left?
We lean to the left because we're free now.
During the meal, we spilled 10 drops of wine to remind us of the 10 plagues. Daddy takes the middle matzah.
Do you remember I was going to tell you something about the matzah? We break the middle piece of matzah in half, and this bit's called the afikoman. Now, Michael's going to hide it, and the children have to try and find it. Only when they've found it can they come back to the table, and they can bribe us, because only when the adults have got the afikoman back can we carry on with the rest of the ceremony. Bye-bye.
Watch looks at Christianity next week on BBC2, celebrating Easter. That's at the same time, 10:35.